as long as everyone is wearing folding gloves and masks. If you need to make up seat time for your absences, the CTHS recovery program will begin on Tuesday, October 20th until Saturday, January 9th. Daily opportunities will occur on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. There will be Saturday opportunities from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. The Saturday opportunities will occur every other weekend. Please make sure you are on time wearing a mask and bring a charged laptop so that you can complete your academic work. If you have any questions, please see Mr. Harden. This is Miranda. This is Sam. Have a marvelous Monday.
Nice. Okay, couple news and notes. Today we're going to start talking about the Islamic gunpowder empires. Got a PowerPoint, lots of videos, stuff like that. Lots of stuff to talk about. It is very much a reflection of what you were supposed to read on Friday when I was out. So really all you're doing, depending on how much you put in those Persian charts, you're just kind of adding some supplementary material. That being said, the things that I kind of pulled out, they are the things that I think are the most important for you to understand. So especially like specific vocabulary, terms, names, people, places, make sure that that is represented in your Persian chart. Because on Wednesday, we are going to have another SAQ in one of our last daily grades of the 6 weeks over all of this, over the Islamic gunpowder empires. On the SAQs, it's really important you actually use some of this vocab, some of these specific terms, names, concepts, stuff like that to serve as the foundation of your answers. Again, using the ACE format, you bring up something specific like, today or tomorrow we'll talk about the Dev Shermay. And then you kind of explain how it was significant and what it was all about. That is the easiest way to score well in these SAQs. Usually what's messing people up is they're being way too vague. They're kind of sort of telling me about something, but it's not specific enough to really get the points. You do have to be specific. And luckily between your reading and the notes, hopefully you're going to add on to over the next couple of days, you'll get what you need. So that's coming up on Wednesday. We'll probably be talking about the Islamic gunpowder empires today, tomorrow, and maybe a little bit on Wednesday to wrap it up. Speaking of, just for meanness, how many of you guys are taking the pre-ACT test on Wednesday? Okay, we got 3 of you. All right, just helping me kind of plan out things. Later in the week, the other grade that we're taking this week, and it's a big one, is your second notebook check of the 6 weeks, your final one. What is back there on that list, that is all that needs to be in there. There's 5 broad things. They're 20 points each. Please get this in complete, get in on time, because this is its own daily grade, but it's also going to average with your first notebook check for your final test grade. The test grade that comes from the notebook check, it's supposed to be the easy one, so please let it be the easy one. If for some ungodly reason you have not turned in notebook check number 1 yet, please get that in as soon as possible. That way you got a chance of these grades kind of averaging out to be halfway decent. Because really after this week, I mean, that's it for the most part for grades that I'm taking. So, just kind of keep that in mind. That being said, I am offering some extra credit. One final extra credit opportunity. It's pretty much the same thing that we had last 6 weeks. It's a historical documentary review essay. You watch a documentary, you write up a short review of it, put it in your own words. Needs to be 30 minutes, needs to be over something from the period of 1200. I'll give you all the way up until 1750. So that should tie to a lot of things we either are discussing or are going to discuss. That is going to be due on Monday. So you got a full week, Monday before midnight, but that will be your absolute last opportunity to do anything about your grade, because next week I'm not taking any new grades. Yes?
What is it for? Like, is it replacing the daily grade?
Nope, it's just going to add on 15 points to a test grade. So no daily grade. Well, it is going to have its own daily grade, but that's more just so I can kind of keep track of who turns it in. So yeah, it's an extra 100. It's not replacing anything, but it's an extra 100 for a daily grade. But it's really that extra 15 points that's going to benefit you the most. Again, you don't have to do it, but it is highly encouraged. Other things, I always got lots of announcements. DCA, your grades are in. If you did the extra credit quiz on AP Classroom, those points have been added on based on what you have in the gradebook. They're already in there. if you failed this, without the extra credit, if you failed it, you can raise your grade up to a 70. If you would like to retake this thing, you need to let me know over the next couple days. You can either email me or after class, just give me your name. Basically, over the next couple days, I'm going to take a list of names, and on Wednesday after school, I'm going to open it up just for those students. You will have from Wednesday after school all the way through Sunday night before midnight to get your retake done. After that, there's not much I can do. So get with me. You can either email me or you can talk to me. I'm going to send out an email going over this later today. But again, if you want to retake it, by all means, let me know. And finally, AP exam deposit, $44 if you are not on free and reduced lunch, $25 if you are. It is due this Friday if you want to take this test. Guys, I highly encourage you guys to take this. If you work hard and you study and you just pay attention in class, you're going to be ready for this thing by May. It's just one of those things. You're going to be writing, you're going to be doing all sorts of stuff that isn't necessarily always the greatest fun time. It's all in preparation of that. So highly encourage you to do it if you're able. If you have any questions, let me know. Or actually email Miss Cordova. She's kind of the expert on this. But that money is due in the total registration side by this Friday. Again, highly encourage it. There's a good form up here if you want to take a picture of it that goes over some of the stuff. I also have some handouts if you're still kind of confused on some things. We can get that stuff squared away. So all you need today is your notebook. I'm going to take a few notes, add on a little bit to what you already have. So let's go ahead and get to it. We're talking about the Islamic gunpowder empires, early modern Islam, 1450 to 1750. Now, this will more or less be the last time we spend, any sort of significant time on Islam. We've done a decent amount, but these empires go on up until, at least with the Ottomans, up until the 1900s. So this will cover a lot of ground, introducing you to them. That way, when we mention them moving forward, it's like, oh yeah, these guys, I remember that. Remember, we are entering a new unit. We are now in Unit 3, the land-based empires. Going over some of the new land-based empires that really developed in this early modern period, 1450 to 1750. Those are the years that we're really getting into now. Again, PowerPoint, got a bunch of cool videos. Hopefully this kind of all make more sense. So I've got some review questions here, and I'm not really going to ask you to answer these because I think most of these, all of them you should know, but most of them I think are so easy that you will know. So rather than answer every single one, I may ask for a couple answers, but I just want you to ask yourself, hey, do I know this? Is this something I'm familiar with? Have I heard this before? Because these are all some pretty relatively easy questions that you should know. Such as, who was the founder of Islam? How did the Islamic faith spread? Where did the Islamic faith spread? You look at the areas that are thoroughly Islamic to this day, yeah, you kind of got your answer. What are the core beliefs of Islam called? And again, I put this up here because, when it comes to belief systems, a lot of times in this class, it's one of those things where, you'll be reading a primary or secondary source document, and they may refer to something like Ramadan or, the Hajj or something like that, or the 5 pillars, Just being able to associate those particular things, those ideas with the correct religion, a lot of times you can draw some conclusions and you can answer test questions just based on kind of knowing what religion they belong with. So that's one of those things in this class with religion. You don't have to be an expert, but you do need to associate certain key concepts and tenets of the faith with the faith that they belong to. What is a caliphate? This is a good one. What are the 2 main branches of Islam? You probably remember after the death of Muhammad, there was some debate as to who should be the leader of the faith, the spiritual and political leader. That kind of caused this rift, and it's a rift that continues to this day. That is worth knowing. We'll refer to it a little bit later. What is Sharia? It's the Islamic code of law. But still, what is Sharia? You need to know that. And finally, and I am going to ask somebody this, where did gunpowder originate and how can it spread, or how did it spread? Who can tell me where gunpowder originated? This is super easy. Mr. Cuppet. China. Okay. China, like a lot of things, they invented gunpowder, probably on accident, but still they invented it. It's another group, though, that probably was the most responsible for its spread. We talked about this group last week. Can anybody tell me what this group is? Mayo. The Mongols, fantastic. It's one of the things that made the Mongols so successful. They would conquer a people, they would check out their technology, they'd say, wow, that's awesome, we're going to use that. They would conscript some of the people that were adept at making those things or using those things into their ranks. And it's really through the Mongols that you see them not only spread the use of gunpowder technology by using it consistently to conquer their enemies, but also after they really opened up trade, everything spread a little bit more speedily, a little bit more easily from east to west. So again, you know, it's one of those things, through warfare, the technology spread, and through warfare, people learned about this technology, including the groups that we're going to be talking about. The term gunpowder empires refers to large multi-ethnic states in Southwest, Central, and South Asia that heavily relied on firearms to conquer and control their territories. Along with Russia, a new empire that we're going to talk about probably beginning next week, the gunpowder empires in the period of 1450 to 1750 included three in which Islam was very strong: the Ottomans, the Safavid, and the Mughal empires. Now, little tip, when I have something underlined, it means it's probably significant. When you see stuff in gold, it's like questions I'm going to ask you. Those are significant too, because I'm trying to get you to think about those things. But the things in underline, I mean, they're what I think are some of the most noteworthy things. It'll be hard for you to remember every single thing about all three of these guys. It is. But if you can remember the constants, the things that they have in common, I think that will really serve you well. So first, they were all from nomadic Turkic backgrounds, and they all spoke forms of the Turkic family of languages. Now, this is important. The Turks, much like the Mongols, start off as nomads from Central Asia. And years prior to this, they start kind of migrating more and more to the west, more and more to the Middle East. Okay? If you recall, like the Seljuk Turks, they kind of chipped away a lot of the Abbasid caliphates, you know, kind of area of control. The Mamluk Turks, the same sort of thing. Those earlier caliphates, like the Abbasids and the Umayyad, they were primarily Arabs, okay? They spoke Arabic, they're of Arab ethnicity. I mean, they were really the rulers of the Muslim world. But during this time period, and really just before it, it kind of switches more to the Turks. The Turks, you got Turkey today, named after. Turkey is actually what's left of the Ottoman Empire, you know, following their defeat in World War I. But again, it is important to know that all three of these empires are of Turkic background rather than Arab. The next thing, they all really took advantage of the fall of the Mongol Empire. I mean, the Mongols controlled pretty much most of the territory that these three will rise up and take over. Okay, but once the Mongols fell, because remember, the Mongols grow really, really fast. But then after the death of Genghis Khan, and then later his son Obadai, you know, succession in the Mongol Empire was always really kind of a touchy subject. There was fighting over it because it didn't automatically go to the oldest son. So you do see the empire split up into those four khanates we talked about last week. And then after that, you know, with the rise of other groups, they just kind of fall by the wayside. But that left a big power vacuum, you know? And it's these groups, especially in the Middle East and Central and South Asia, that really kind of stood up and asserted their dominance. They all, of course, use gunpowder. That's why they're called the Islamic gunpowder empires. Now, here's the deal. It's not that they're the first or the only people using gunpowder in the world at the time. They're not. But they're some of the first brand new empires that really were able to gain territory due to their proficiency using gunpowder technology. Cannons, early fire. They were some of the new empires, along with Russia, that really kind of adapted this technology, and that's what allowed them to conquer as much territory as they did. They were all three militaristic. They all three ultimately start off very advanced, but as European nations are also on the rise during this period, you know, we're talking 1400s, 1500s onward, all three kind of failed to keep up with Europe, especially after Europe engages in the age of exploration and overseas colonization. Okay, so they all start off really strong. In the beginning, they were stronger than most of your European kingdoms, but over time, as Europe really gets on the rise, because that's what happens during this period of 1450 to 1750, Europe starts becoming the dominant force in the world in most places through colonization and all sorts of stuff we'll get into later. The Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals all kind of fell to keep up with the line. So you got all those things in common. They were all militaristic. They really kind of prized military strength, but they also all three left behind some really cool art and architecture because that was part of the culture as well. And here they are, the Islamic gunpowder empires. You need to know the order. You need to know where they were located. That is part of the story. So if I were you, I'd write these three names down in this order, kind of signifying, because they're all connected from west to east. We're going to start off with the Ottomans. They're the ones we're going to talk the most about. They had been around since the 1300s to some extent. Really, their claim to fame and their growth comes in 1453 when they take the Byzantine capital city of Constantinople. Guys, you will notice their empire almost mirrors that of the earlier Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, the one that survived after the fall of Rome. We'll talk a little bit about the Byzantines here in a second because we didn't skip them, but we didn't spend much time on them. For you to understand why the Ottomans were successful, you got to know a little bit about the Byzantines and their success. They replaced them and they did, at least trade-wise, a lot of the same things. They are Sunni Muslim. That's really important to know. Remember, the two main branches of Islam are Sunni and Shia, or Shia. These guys are going to rule over this territory, although it does shrink a little bit over time, all the way up until after World War I. Okay, so they're going to be around for a while. We're going to talk about them in World War I. They're one of the groups that we fought against in World War I. And because they lost, they were on the losing side, along with the German Empire and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, well, they kind of lose a lot of their stuff. Today, what is left of the Ottoman Empire, named after kind of the ethnicity of the people, is just Turkey. So Turkey is the Ottoman Empire. It's just what's left over and after it went through all sorts of modernization and reform. Further to the east, you have the Safavid Empire. The Safavid. If you want to associate, the Ottomans with Turkey, well, associate the Safavid, or Safavid, I'll try and pronounce it like 5 different ways, with modern-day Iran. Iran. Same location as many of those old Persian empires. In fact, Persian, a lot of people ethnically kind of consider themselves Persian, ethnically, culturally. Now, the Safavid are Muslims, but they are adherents to Shia Islam, not Sunni Islam, which means that the Safavids and the Ottomans, even though they're both Muslims, they don't like each other for most of their history. Today, you see a lot of conflict, a lot of animosity between many of the countries in the Middle East and Iran. A lot of it's still because of that difference in their adherence to different forms of Islam. Specifically, like Iraq and Iran, they went to war several times. Some of it does go back to even this rivalry of the Safavids and the Ottomans. We won't talk a whole lot about Safavids. I think I got like 2 slides on this. We'll get a little bit more in depth, though, into our final Islamic gunpowder empire, the Mughal Empire. The founders of the Mughal Empire are actually descendants of the Mongols. They're kind of a mixture of Turkic and Mongol influences that, converted to Islam. The Mughals are going to rule over India all the way up until the 1800s, when they're essentially replaced by a growing power, a power that will become the biggest empire in world history, the British. The British are the ones that kind of displaced the Mughals. And we'll get into how that happens a little bit later on. Now, the Mughals are in kind of a difficult situation from the get-go. They, much like the Delhi Sultanate before them, which wasn't around very long, they are predominantly Muslim. The ruling class is Muslim, yet the majority of the population is Hindu. Okay, and we're mainly talking modern day India. You get a lot of animosity from that. There's always animosity anytime the rulers are one faith and the majority of the people are another. Okay, and they're being asked to convert or they're not being treated as equals because they didn't. You get a lot of animosity between Muslims and Hindus from this time period. Later on, when the British essentially take over this place as a colony, because the British ruled over India for many, many years, that animosity continued. And it was so bad that when India finally won their independence after World War II, one of the first things they did is they broke apart their territory. A big chunk of India, today known as Pakistan, was carved out. And that was carved out predominantly for the Muslim population, India predominantly for the Hindu population. To this day, India and Pakistan do not like each other. In fact, they both have nuclear weapons and they're pointing at each other all the time. And I guess what I'm saying is you look at some of the conflicts we even have today, some of the foundation, the roots of these conflicts go all the way back to this time. These different territories being ruled by different forms of Islam, by different types of people. So the first group we're going to talk about is the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire, again, they ruled over a lot of the same territory as the Byzantine. You're talking about the Eastern Mediterranean. You're talking about parts of North Africa. You're also talking about some of Eastern Europe, specifically a region we call the Balkans. I would write down that name, the Balkans, and write down some of the countries like Greece and Bulgaria and Romania, Croatia, the list goes on and on. Guys, over the years, a lot of stuff's going to go down in the Balkans, especially when we get into World War I. It's all because of stuff going down in the Balkans. A lot of times on AP tests, they'll just say the Balkans. They won't say, oh, that assassination in Serbia. They won't say that. They'll say, what was happening in the Balkans. Again, it's named the Balkans because it's on the Balkan Peninsula. And this was always an area that was kind of contentious with the Ottomans because, again, they're Muslims, yet people in Eastern Europe, at least before the Ottomans showed up, were predominantly Eastern Orthodox Christians. Now, some of them do convert. A lot of them convert. It's one of the reasons you still see a sizable Muslim population in Eastern Europe to this day. But, again, that doesn't go without conflict. Before we get into the Ottomans, we're going to rewind a little bit. We're going to do a little bit with the Byzantine. Because we talked about the Byzantine, we referred to them, I just said, they're the Romans. And they were, but a little bit different. They're a more Greek-centric sort of Roman Empire than you had previously. They're a very Christian Roman Empire. Their success all goes back to this city of Constantinople. You'll see that over time, the Byzantine Empire shrinks down to almost nothing. But being able to control that city based on its location, right there at kind of the nexus of trade routes, we'll look at it more specifically here in a second, that is ultimately what allowed them to live as long as they did. And one of the reasons, no one could ever take them before this time period is they had these huge walls surrounding their cities. Or their city, it's Constantinople that we're talking about, but walls that went for miles and miles around the perimeter that were extraordinarily thick. I don't even remember the exact sum, but I mean, they were ridiculously thick, so thick that no one had been able to get through them before. Well, the Ottomans are a gunpowder empire. They use cannons. And even though it takes several months, they eventually break the walls down. They take the city. That is what really puts them on the map. And the video gets into that a little bit, but let's go back. Let's look at the Byzantine a little bit. All right, my kiddo's online. I'm gonna have to unshare for a minute and switch out the volume where it's coming through. But this video is posted on Canvas, so just hold on. All right, let's fix this to where you guys can hear it. Now, this is one of the old school videos. Compared to some of the other ones I saw, I like this the best because it gives you a decent idea of who the Byzantine were, why they were successful, and how over years they just kind of fell apart. Again, Constantinople's still around. It just goes by a different name now. We'll see if you can spot what that name is. You probably heard of it.
Rome and the Western Roman Empire fell in 476, but the empire did not disappear overnight. In fact, the Eastern Roman Empire, which later became known as the Byzantine Empire, survived another 1,000 years. While the cities of the Western Roman Empire were crumbling, the Byzantine Empire prospered and preserved the heritage and traditions of Rome. But it also borrowed heavily from other traditions. Byzantine civilization blended Christian religion, Greek art, science, and philosophy, and Roman engineering and law. The Byzantine capital, Constantinople, became the new Rome. Built on the ruins of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, Constantinople was located on a major trade route between Europe and Asia. Besides developing into one of Europe's busiest marketplaces, it also became a melting pot where Eastern and Western cultures merged. One of the most striking examples of this cultural blending was Constantinople's church of Hagia Sophia. Rebuilt by the Emperor Justinian in the early 6th century, it combined Greek and Roman building techniques in a new and Eastern-inspired architectural style that quickly became the trademark of Byzantine architecture. This domed structure, almost a city in itself, became the emotional center of the Eastern Christian world. When the Western Roman Empire fell, Byzantium lost most of its European provinces. But by the year 555, new Byzantine armies had reconquered many of them. These conquests, along with trade with Africa, Asia, and Europe, made the Byzantine Empire rich in wealth and culture. Merchants, scholars, and missionaries traveled throughout the Byzantine Empire and beyond, spreading the ideas and writings of a culture built on Greek, Roman, Persian, Egyptian, and other influences. Perhaps the greatest influence of the Byzantines can be seen in Russia. According to an early history, Prince Vladimir of Kiev was so impressed by the wealth and beauty of Byzantine civilization, he adopted Byzantine Christianity and arranged for the mass conversion of his people. Gradually, Russia absorbed not only the religion, but the institutions and culture of the Byzantines. These influences are still seen in the icons of Russian Orthodoxy and the onion-domed churches that dot the Russian landscape. But while Byzantine culture thrived and spread, the political and military power of the empire diminished. In the 7th century, the empire began to shrink, weakened by wars with its Persian, Islamic, Arab, and Slav neighbors. Contributing to this decline was a long-term economic conflict with Venice, a rival trading city in Italy. Venetian merchants and rulers wanted to dominate Mediterranean trade, and they hungered for the wealth of Constantinople. They saw their opportunity in the Crusades, a series of wars between Christians and Muslims over control of the Holy Land. The Venetians persuaded an army of crusaders to attack Constantinople and loot the city in 1204. Arriving on Venetian boats, the European knights stormed the city. For 3 days, the invaders pillaged and plundered. During the chaos, much of the accumulated art and treasure of centuries was destroyed. Most of what was not destroyed was boxed up and shipped to Venice. The Byzantine Empire never fully recovered. Over the next 200 years, Constantinople continued to decline. Finally, the empire that had stretched from Spain to Syria was reduced to little more than the walled city-state of Constantinople. Byzantium's end finally came in 1452, when the armies of Sultan Muhammad II of the Ottoman Turks attacked Constantinople. Once again, the city was plundered. But unlike the Venetians, the Ottoman Turks weren't looking to loot the city and leave. They wanted the city itself. The Sultan made the city his capital, and it was eventually renamed Istanbul. He also converted the great church of Hagia Sophia into a mosque. The city that had been the heart of Eastern Christendom for nearly a millennium became a major center of Muslim culture. With the victory of the Ottomans, the Byzantine Empire ended, but the Byzantine legacy remained and influenced generations to come. The Byzantine Empire had preserved the heritage of ancient Rome and mixed it with cultures of Asia. This Byzantine culture that blended traditions of East and West left an enduring influence that continues to this day.
Okay. So again, you know, it's the same basic territory that the Byzantine had. The Ottomans just kind of grew it from there. And even though they were around a little bit before, I mean, they technically start in their origins in 1300. It's really that conquest of Constantinople in 1453 that, you know, literally and figuratively puts them on the map. Again, the Ottoman Empire was centered around modern-day Turkey. Turkey is still essentially the Ottoman Empire. It's what they were left with after World War I concluded. And now, obviously, different people took power and reforms were made, so they don't necessarily resemble exactly what the Ottoman Empire did anymore. But as far as the geography, as far as the history, yeah, they essentially are what is left of the Ottoman Empire to this day. They were founded by a man named Osman I in 1300. So they start all the way in 1300. They last all the way until 1918. That is a very long time. Again, you know, you're looking at a big continuity in this one force ruled by this one family, this one dynasty. Ottoman is actually like a play on Osman, the people of Osman, for, you know, 600 some odd years. That's pretty amazing. Now, under Osman, they grew a little bit on the Anatolian Peninsula, but it's that guy Mehmed II, Mehmed the Conqueror, who really, like I said, puts them on the map, because he's the guy in 1453 that manages to capture this city that they had never fallen to outside invaders. I know in there they talk about the Crusaders that went in and looted. Yeah, but they let them in. They let them through the gates because they didn't think they were going to do that. Again, they're Christians after all. But this is the first group, because a lot of people had tried, that was actually able to take the city from the outside. Again, I'm not going to ask you a lot of these questions because they get really repetitive. But what empire was Constantinople the capital of? Capital of the Byzantines. We just watched the video. I will ask you this. Does anybody know who Constantinople's named after? Very important historical individual, especially in Christianity.
Emperor Constantine.
The Emperor Constantine. Guys, the Emperor Constantine's a really big deal. He was the first Christian Roman emperor. He was also, hold on, I forgot to share my screen back with these guys. So you just hold on. Sorry, I forgot about you. Anyway, so yeah, that's who Constantinople's named after. He was the first Christian Roman emperor, but you also got to understand, guys, before Constantine, Christianity had been around for quite a while, but was still kind of a fringe religion. It had grown immensely in popularity, but Constantine's the guy that said, hey, you know, it's not legal to be a Christian anymore. Because before that, the Romans were literally like feeding Christians to lions. He's also the guy that got the leaders of all these different branches or these different groups of Christians around the Mediterranean together. And guys, that's when the Bible actually got put together. Because before that, you did not have a cohesive Holy Bible. So Constantine is a huge factor in the rise of Christianity, because before Constantine, I mean, it had grown into a larger religion over the several hundred years since Jesus was crucified, but it still wasn't seen as legitimate, really. Once he converts to Christianity, well, now the Roman Empire is, largely Christian. And even when Rome falls itself in 476, Christianity stays. And that's the big irony. The Romans are the ones that crucified Jesus, but they're also the government that most heavily sponsors them much later on and helps them to become, the world's most popular religion to this day. Well, that's because of Constantine. Mehmed took the city. How did he take it? What did he use? Come on, that was a great hint. Gunpowder. That's why it's called the Islamic Gunpowder Empire. Using cannons. And again, with those cannons, he could break the city walls down. It took him months and months, but he could do it. The thing is why. And really what it comes down to, Constantinople was a very, very wealthy city through a lot of its history. At this point, it was kind of on the downturn. But guys, it's a trade hub. We've seen this before. We've talked about cities, where you see all these trade routes converge. And whoever controls that city is going to be able to dominate trade in the region, but they're also going to make a lot of money. So look at where Constantinople is, okay? It's right here on the tip of something called the Bosphorus Strait. Okay, the Bosphorus connects the Black Sea to the Aegean, and therefore to the Mediterranean. So whoever controls this, is going to have access to the Mediterranean and North Africa, Europe, the Middle East, but also through the Black Sea, you can get up here further into Eastern Europe, and then via those navigable rivers, you can make it all the way up to Russia. That's one of the reasons the Proto-Russians, before they're even Russia, are so inspired by the Byzantines. Again, they were trade partners, And really, you look at Russia today, and obviously we're talking years and years later, but you look at the foundation of what becomes Russia, it's got those Viking influences, because they're the ones that kind of, I guess you could say, colonized that area first. But it's also very much a result of Byzantine influences. Give you a good example. Once Russia forms an empire of their own, they call their leaders the Tsar. Have you guys ever heard the term a Tsar? That's a Russian emperor. Well, all that is a Russian play on the term Caesar, which, after Julius Caesar was kind of like a nickname almost for your Roman emperors. Again, a lot of what they do with their art and architecture, and religion, Eastern Orthodoxy becomes Russian Orthodoxy, comes from that relationship with the Byzantines. So it's a valuable trade city because of that, but also just look at all the points that converge. Overland Silk Road trade. Well, this is really the westernmost spot that it kind of stops at. Indian Ocean trade. They're controlling territories that are going through the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea. Ultimately, a lot of that, at least overland, is going to funnel through here as well. So again, it had a lot of value to the economics of the empire. Plus, it was just seen as this sign of prestige. That had been the central city of Christendom at this point for hundreds of years. It's named after the first Christian emperor, and now it's a Muslim city. Now it's the crown jewel of a new Muslim empire. They couldn't call it, though, Constantinople anymore, so they renamed it. What did they rename it to? Just say.
Istanbul.
Istanbul, which is almost the opposite, the city of Islam. And Istanbul is what it's called to this day. The rulers of the Ottoman Empire, very similar to the old school caliphs of like the Abbasid Caliphate. Similar role, but a different name. Instead of caliph, they were called sultans. And some of that's probably just due to, you're talking about different ethnic groups, different languages. Them being more of Turkic background than of Arab. One of the things that they mentioned, and one of the real kind of hallmarks of this city, was a church, the largest church in the world, or the Christian church in the world for many, many years, Hagia Sophia. This is built well over 1,000 years ago. And it was a real testament, to just how much of a sponsor of Eastern Orthodox Christianity the Byzantine really were. So Mehmed II, he comes into the city and he sees this big church. And now the city is going to be, the center of the Islamic world, essentially. Could have torn it down, but he didn't. He looked at it and he said, man, that's beautiful. He respected it. he converts it into a mosque. And for a long time, this was the world's largest mosque. It actually might still be. You know, you look inside, you're going to see some Christian artwork. You're going to see a lot of Islamic calligraphy. Again, you know, just Hagia Sophia was so astounding that even these Muslim conquerors couldn't stand to see it laid to waste. Under Mehmed II, Istanbul grew even more beautiful and expanded over both sides of the Bosphorus Strait. His army steadily seized lands around the Black Sea and further into Eastern Europe, the Balkans. Remember the Balkans. To counter the power and wealth of Venice. Venice they mentioned in the video briefly. Guys, Venice is in Italy. You know, it's a place with the canals, you know, where people are on the gondolas and stuff like that. But it was a trade city. It was a really valuable trade city. After all, it was out of those Italian city-states, you know, that were trade cities that had so much money that you get the Renaissance because they had the money to pay for it. Well, during this time period, you know, they were the main trading power in the Mediterranean. They, along with previously the Byzantine. Well, now the Ottomans are coming in, and one of the things they wanted the city for, period, was to dominate trade. So Mehmed builds up his navy. He starts to exert his power on Venice. And while there was certainly a rivalry there, they end up kind of cooperating. But at first, it was much more contentious. The Ottomans never outright conquer Venice, but what do you know? This old game, they did force Venice to pay them tribute because, again, they were a little bit stronger militarily. Now, eventually, they start working with each other. Eventually, it's the Ottomans and the Venetians that are really kind of monopolizing trade into the Mediterranean. And the rest of Europe is just kind of out of luck. If you want, you know, Eastern goods, you want these luxury goods, you got to deal with these guys, the Ottomans and, you know, kind of their middleman, the Venetians. That's going to be a big deal. These Western European Christians don't want to deal with them. It's one of the things that sparks the age of exploration, because the conquest of Constantinople is in 1453. Age of exploration picks up right after that. Eventually, the Ottomans add lands in present-day Syria, Israel, Egypt, and Algeria. And as we said earlier, Istanbul becomes the center of the Islamic world. It today is still the capital of modern Turkey. Here you have the palace, the royal residence of the Ottoman sultans that's still standing in Istanbul, Topkapi Palace. I mean, just look at this, and it's hard to see, you know, from an aerial perspective, but this thing was huge. It was immense, and that just kind of signifies the sort of wealth that was coming into Constantinople, that was coming into Istanbul. We're going to watch one last video, and then we're going to call it a day. This video deals with the rise of the Ottoman Empire. Some of it's going to be kind of a review of what I just said. But it's going to put some little spin on it, you know, so that's kind of good to see. Pay attention. Once this video is done, we'll call it a day. Tomorrow we'll pick back up with the Ottomans, spend a little bit of time on them. We'll talk about the Ottomans the most of all three of them. Then we'll knock out the Safavids, and maybe we'll do the Mughals on Wednesday. I'm hoping that it doesn't take all day Wednesday. That way, maybe we can even do the SAQ class. That just kind of depends. Here we go. The rise of the Ottomans.
At its height, the Ottoman Empire spanned 3 continents and covered what we now know today as Turkey, Egypt, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Macedonia, Hungary, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and several other regions in Arabia and North Africa. It was one of the largest and longest-lasting empires in history, spanning from about 1299 CE all the way to 1922. Today, few remnants of the once mighty empire remain, largely centralized in Turkey. But how did the Ottoman Empire rise to power in the first place? Originally, the eastern region of the Mediterranean where the Ottoman Empire flourished was actually under the control of the Roman Empire, specifically the Eastern Roman Empire, also called the Byzantine Empire. After Western Rome fell in the 5th century, the Christian Byzantine Empire struggled to